Number 10. Tomás de Torquemada. Ever heard of the Spanish Inquisition? Well, this guy was one of its star killers. Not only do we wish it never happened in the first place, it did, so we might as well talk about it and learn from it. But we can't discuss the Inquisition without mentioning Tomás, who was responsible for thousands of deaths. He gave people two choices: either join the Catholic Church or die, which led to thousands of Jewish and Islamic people being exiled from Spain. He played the role of inquisitor and was in charge of investigating and punishing heretics. He oversaw the burning of thousands of innocent people, as Tomás often used cruel methods of extracting confessions from people he believed to be heretics. He seemed to almost enjoy his job, hanging, burning, suffocating, and tormenting people with the rack and waterboarding. No one knows exactly how many people died during the Inquisition, but historians estimate anywhere between 30,000 to 300,000. Pretty wide gap there.
Number 9. Andrew Cunanan. Andrew Cunanan was incredibly intelligent as well, with an IQ of 147, but Cunanan was also a tactical liar. He would claim that his father was an Israeli millionaire, and he displayed early signs of antisocial personality disorder. To fund the lavish lifestyle that he craved, Cunanan would make friends of wealthy older men, which worked out for him when he moved in with millionaire Norman Blatchford, who treated him to luxury cars and vacations in southern France. But that didn't last, as Blatchford finally had enough of Cunanan and he was thrown out. Now this hit to his ego led to the passing of at least 5 different people, including Chicago tycoon Lee Miglin and Gianni Versace, on July 15th, 1997. In June of 1997, Cunanan became the 449th fugitive to be listed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. It wasn't too much longer after the passing of Versace that Andrew's body was discovered in a Miami Beach houseboat, having taken his own life. Number 8. Thomas James Holden. Thomas James Holden was the first man to ever make the most wanted list of the FBI, so he kind of had to make this list. His criminal career began in the 1920s with the robbery of a mail train and didn't stop there at all. In 1930, he escaped from Leavenworth Penitentiary and was recaptured on a golf course in Kansas City. He was on parole in 1949 and drinking with his wife and her 2 brothers when an argument broke out, resulting in Holden taking the life of all 3, then fleeing with the FBI on his trail. He evaded them for quite some time, but the FBI caught him 13 months later after receiving a tip from a man in Oregon. Just a reminder, if you guys are enjoying what you're seeing, make sure to give us a like. It's all we really need to feel your support. Thanks guys. Number 7. James Earl Ray. While Holden was the first man to make the list, James Earl Ray was the first man to make the most wanted list twice. His first crime is his most famous, as he was first wanted by the FBI for taking the life of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. He was captured 2 months later when a customs official at Heathrow Airport recognized his alias from a Canadian wanted list, but in 1977 he escaped from a Tennessee penitentiary, leading him to be put back on that list. But not for too long, as 3 days later he was recaptured and a year was added to his sentence, bringing it up to a grand total of 100 years, which kinda seems a little pointless, but I get it. Number 6. Victor Manuel Guerrena. While not the most evil, especially compared to most of the others on this list, Victor Manuel Guerrena has the longest membership on the FBI's most wanted list. In 1984, Guerrena was a Wells Fargo security guard who turned on 2 fellow workers in their Wells Fargo armored car. He isn't the most evil because all he did to the 2 other co-workers is tie them up, but he then fled with $7 million taken from the truck and was literally never seen again. To this day, the FBI is still offering a $1 million reward for information leading to his arrest. It would be insane if he happened to actually be caught at this point. Number 5. Omar August Pinson. Omar August Pinson brings us back to the more evil side of things, as he was convicted of slaying an on-duty Oregon police officer before he made a jailbreak. Omar managed to evade capture on the run for almost a year, and even made it out of a shootout in January 1950 with Montana police completely unscathed. The problem for Pinson here came when a car salesman identified him and gave the FBI enough clues to track him down. He was recaptured in September 1950 and returned to prison, making parole in the early 70s. Number 4. William Bradford Bishop Jr. William Bradford Bishop Jr. made the list for pretty brutally taking the life of his wife, mother, and and he disappeared in 1976. In the next few years, witnesses claim to have seen him in several different locations overseas, but he still hasn't been caught. Bishop wasn't added to the FBI's most wanted list until 2014 when the Bureau had produced an age-advanced image of him to aid in his capture, but it failed to turn up any leads, and 2 years later he was dropped from the list again. He would now be 84 years old if he is still alive, but we just might not ever know, which is kinda not a great feeling. Number 3, Robert William Fisher. Robert Fisher is actually on the current FBI most wanted list for taking the life of his wife and their 2 children before blowing up the house that they all lived in Scottsdale, Arizona in April 2001. He was described as a cruel and distant control freak towards his family. He and his wife would fight a lot, and Fisher was embarrassed that his son Bobby did not like to hunt or fish, and once tried to teach him and his daughter how to swim by throwing them off of a boat. Fisher was also very controlling about the house they lived in, not allowing the walls in the house to be painted anything other than white, and only a small number of pictures were allowed on the wall. Any sentimental objects of his wife's had to be kept hidden away. He's still out there, so watch out. Number 2, Eduardo Ravello. Guess what? I have another guy who is included on the current FBI's most wanted list, just to keep you a little on your toes, you know? Eduardo Ravello was indicted in Texas in 2008 for his alleged involvement in racketeering activities, conspiracy to launder monetary instruments, aka money, and conspiracy to possess substances with the intent to distribute them. His criminal activities began in 2003, and Ravello is known to be a captain within the Barrio Azteca American-Mexican criminal enterprise, and is allegedly responsible for issuing orders to the Barrio Azteca members, who allegedly act as hitmen for an even bigger substance trafficking organization. Apparently, in total, they are responsible for a whole number of lost lives. Ravello himself has ties to Mexico and El Paso, Texas, and it's presumed that he may have had plastic surgery and altered his fingerprints, but he's still out and about at the moment. And in at number 1 is Ted Bundy. I bet you were wondering if more recognizable names would show up on this list. Well, you were right. The vicious serial killer Ted Bundy was actually a 2-time member of the FBI's most wanted list, who committed his first known killing in 1974. Following his first, Bundy unfortunately took 12 more lives during his time until one of his victims escaped, but even then, before he could actually be arrested in 1975, he did it again 5 more times. During his 1977 trial, he escaped from the courthouse through a window and was most wanted for 6 days before recapture, but like I said, he was on that list twice, as later that year he escaped again. He committed 3 more attacks and took 2 more lives before finally being stopped for driving a stolen car. Thankfully, this monster can never escape again, as he was put to the electric chair in 1989.
Starting off this countdown, we have Nanny Doss. Nanny Doss, otherwise known as Nancy Hazel, was a seemingly innocent and sweet woman, but what people didn't know was that she took the lives of almost a dozen people between 1920 to 1954. She targeted people all across the South and Midwest, including her own family members. She apparently poisoned 4 of her husbands, her 2 sisters, her grandson, her mother-in-law, and her mother. She may have also poisoned her daughters. All were killed for different reasons, some for money, some to avoid caring for them, etc. What's creepy is that she was nicknamed the Giggling Grandma. Why? Well, because every time she would tell the story of how she killed her late husbands, she laughed hysterically.
Number 9, Caligula. Man, his name is too fun to say. Too bad he wasn't a fun guy. It's better I tell you now that essentially this list is a depiction of what happens when the wrong people get their hands on power. From 37 AD to 41 AD, Caligula ruled as if he was some kind of mad god that needed to be satisfied. Not only did his addiction to gambling cause a nightmare for the economy, he seemed to delight in suffering. In the first 3 months of his rule, he made his people sacrifice 160,000 animals in his name. When he first took over as ruler, people actually liked him though. He made helpful political reforms and recalled exiles, but most people blame his future tyranny on a brain fever that befell him later on. He blew money on lavish projects, some still helpful like aqueducts, to building a 2-mile-long floating bridge across the Bay of Bali so he could ride his horse across it day after day. He even ordered his men to attack the sea by collecting shells with their helmets. His lascivious love affairs included copulating with the wives of his allies and even allegedly his own sisters. Caligula's reign was equal parts terrifying and embarrassing, which is probably why his officers stabbed him to death. Number 8. Leopold II of Belgium. During the height of colonialism, Leopold of Belgium wanted to make his mark by conquering the African Congo. As soon as I say colonialism, you know where things are going, so get ready. He made it his property, and instead of, being a good human being, he decided to establish a dictatorship instead. He made the rest of Europe think that he was acting as a good guy, so they'd give him money, then proceeded to hire mercenaries. These mercenaries were set with the task of draining as much money from the state by enforcing free labor camps. Anyone who disobeyed or failed to meet demands were severely punished and even had their limbs removed. Leopold was responsible for the deaths of 20% of the population and thankfully was stopped before he could do more damage. Roger Casement, after doing a little digging, released a report which detailed the horrors he had committed under the guise of philanthropy. He was forced to surrender the Congo, though it was considered a part of Belgium until the 1950s. Whew, buckle up folks, it only gets worse from here. It's number 7 and we're already at Genghis Khan. Get ready. Genghis Khan, ruler of the Mongolian Empire, killed so many people. He changed the carbon footprint of the earth. In one single battle, he killed over 1.2 million people. Though this sounds like an exaggeration, I don't find it hard to believe, since he just left the corpses to rot. The battlefields became oily and whole mountains of bodies formed. Genghis Khan was supposedly responsible for over 40 million deaths. If you need a number to compare that to, that's the same amount of people who died in World War I altogether. He also enjoyed in excess the spoils of war, brutalizing women and assaulting them. In addition to that, he held mass beauty contests, and all those who didn't win would be given to his soldiers like objects. Because of that, around 16 million people are said to be descendants of him today. That's how many people Many people blame his brutal and ruthless upbringing, as Khan very much had to raise himself under the mentality to kill or be killed. He even killed his own brother at age 10 just for not sharing food. He was also horrendous when it came to tormenting his betrayers. Some ways include pouring molten silver down their throats and sawing people in half while they were still alive. Oh, and he killed 75% of the population of Iran and tried to commit an entire genocide. Yeah, the list goes on, but so does this list, and there is more to come, so let's go. Number 6. Talat Pasha. Pasha was the Grand Vizier to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire in the early 20th century and was the main architect of the Armenian genocide. When Armenian families were evicted from their homes in 1915, his signature was on the orders. On April 24th, they executed several hundred intellectuals in order to begin Turkifying the country. Many were sent through the Mesopotamian desert on death marches without food or water after being stripped naked so the sun would just boil them alive. Anyone who stopped walking was shot. He also created a special organization made of killers and ex-convicts who were ordered to carry out the liquidation of the Christian elements. They drowned people in rivers, threw civilians off cliffs, even crucified and burned people alive. Yep, this happened in the 1900s, by the way. So there are about 600,000 to 1.5 million reasons we wish this man never existed, because that is how many people Pasha was responsible for killing. Ooh, man. Number 5. Idi Amin. General Idi Amin staged a coup on January 25th, 1971 and forced Uganda's first Prime Minister Milton Obote into exile. From there, he created a reign of terror that abused Uganda's freedom after more than 70 years of British rule. Amin organized mass executions of Akoli and Lango Christian tribes who were loyal to Obote. He terrorized his own country with internal security forces whose main purpose was to eliminate those who opposed him. His brutality also resulted in the collapse of the economy. This man just seemed like he just didn't have a single good bone in his body. He was also rumored to have eaten human flesh, and his vicious and inhumane rule resulted in the death of 300,000 civilians. Eventually Amin was forced to flee and sought refuge in Saudi Arabia, though he was never punished for his crimes and died in 2003 due to organ failure. So he got away with it, essentially. Number 4. Pol Pot. You'd think a leader's job would be to protect and serve their country with love and respect, but I guess Pol Pot didn't see it that way. Originally named Salazar, Pot was the leader of the Khmer Rouge totalitarian regime during 1975 to 79 in Cambodia, though technically longer. It was a radical communist government who caused the death of more than 2 million people through forced labor, starvation, disease, torment, persecution, and execution. He wanted to purify society and wanted to extinguish capitalism, Western culture, city life, religion, and all foreign influences in order to form a pure communist regime. All media outlets, along with embassies and external medical help, were refused, and essentially he barricaded Cambodia into their own little world. Education was halted, healthcare eliminated. It was crazy. The people were forced into slave labor on the killing fields, only allowed 180 grams of rice a day. Deadly purges were conducted to eliminate remnants of the old society, including monks, police, doctors, lawyers, teachers, ex-soldiers along with their families, and former government officials. His cruelty and madness knew no bounds. It took years for him to finally be put under house arrest by his peers and was never truly punished for his crimes against humanity. He died of a heart attack in 1998 following his arrest. So, yeah. And we're reaching our top 3. I bet you thought number 3 was gonna be number 1. Nope, there were worse people than him, believe it or not. Number 3, we have Adolf. I can't say his last name because apparently YouTube won't let me, which is ridiculous. He's not Voldemort, but you know who I'm talking about, that really evil German guy. Yeah. I don't really need to go into detail here unless you don't know about one of the most infamous genocides to take place in all of history. Along with the amount of people Adolf's army killed in World War II, his warped and disgusting worldview resulted in the destruction of more than 6 million lives, mainly those of Jewish descent, but LGBTQ, political prisoners, and basically anyone he and his followers deemed a lesser human. He was the personification of hatred and led the world into one of the most deadly wars to date. We should also give a shout out to all of his henchmen who served underneath him, all working together to enact one of the cruelest moments in history. If he hadn't been born, who knows if it would have happened anyways due to political and social tensions of the time, but maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't have happened at all, and all those lives would still be around today. Number 2, guys, like I knew he was bad, but dug deep today, and I would never thought I would say this, but number 2, Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin made his own henchmen disappear in photos, and boy do we wish it was him instead. Stalin was the premier of the Soviet Union and was responsible for the deaths of more than 20 million of his own people, double that if you count World War II. He ruled for 30 years and ruled with an iron fist, eliminating anyone who opposed him, and as you can guess, there were many. In 1927 and 1929, he had 1 million people exiled or imprisoned, 9 to 11 million were forced off their lands, and 3 million peasants were arrested or exiled in the mass collectivization program. 6 to 7 million were killed by artificial famine in the 1930s. During 1936 to 1938, he executed approximately 750,000 during the Great Terror, a brutal political campaign to remove dissenters and any others he considered a threat. He was so paranoid. This guy had no regard for human life whatsoever. While the world was focused on Adolf, he was doing all of this, and he was fighting on the Allies' side, though we started supporting Hitler, and then he came onto our side. Anyways. It is estimated that Stalin orchestrated the deaths of 60 million people, which means about 40,000 people died every week during his reign. Need I say more? And if you think that's bad. Number 1 spot, Mao Zedong. Ready? I don't think anyone can be. Mao Zedong during 1966 to 1976 turned China into a house of fear by eradicating 65 million people. In his attempt for a socialist China, he killed anyone that got in his way, kinda like Stalin, through execution and mass starvation. His biggest threat was the intellect, and revered Emperor Shi Huang, who buried 460 scholars and sought to surpass him by burying alive 46,000 scholars. Yep. My stomach turned when I read that. That's awful. He coined his operation the Great Leap Forward. To combat rising resistance, he created the Red Army, composed of girls and boys from the ages of 14 to 21 to roam cities and target enemies of the state, especially their teachers. He would make the teachers wear dunce hats, cover their faces with ink, and make them crawl on all fours and bark like dogs. He also expanded a system of 1,000 forced labor camps. Most amazing fam, I could go on, but I honestly don't have room. It just seems like there's no end to all the awful things that he did. For all these reasons and more, Mao is of course in our number 1 spot.
And at number 10 is Ted Kaczynski. Ted Unabomber Kaczynski was an anarchist and a mathematical prodigy. He excelled academically from an early age and has an insanely high IQ of 167. He made it into Harvard University at just 16 years old and ultimately gained a PhD in mathematics from the University of Michigan. Now, not too much later, he had become an assistant professor at the University of California, Berkeley, but after handing in his resignation, things started to go downhill. The Unabomber became a hermit and moved to a remote cabin in Lincoln, Montana. Between 1978 and 1995, he took the lives of 3 people and injured 23 others with homemade explosive devices. His manifesto was published in the Washington Post after being sent to the press anonymously, and it explained that the devices were extreme but necessary to attract attention to the erosion of human freedom necessitated by modern technologies requiring large-scale organization. I didn't write that, in case you were curious. That wasn't me. Anyways, he was caught when his brother read the letters in the news, recognized Ted's handwriting, and tipped off the FBI. The Unabomber was finally caught and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.
In our 9th spot, we have Maximilien Robespierre. Maximilien Robespierre was a French lawyer who eventually became one of the most influential figures of the French Revolution. At first, he started out as a strong and great leader, until he became obsessed with the guillotine. He started encouraging more and more people to become executed. More than 17,000 enemies of the revolution were killed as a result, or anyone suspected to be an enemy. So basically, innocent people were killed. That's not all. In a span of 10 months, he took the lives of over 40,000 people, which is absolutely insane. That's like killing 4,000 people a month. Another point is that he lived by the motto, killing is better than forgiving, which is something a psychopath would say. Moving on to number 8, we have Henri Désiré Landru. Henri was a French serial killer who took the lives of at least 7 women between 1915 to 1919. He did so by placing ads in newspapers pretending to be a wealthy widower who was interested in meeting a new bride. A lot of women who had lost their husbands in World War I responded to this ad thinking that it was meant to be, like how easy, and he's got money. Sadly, they would be lured to his home, robbed, and then killed. After doing so, they were dismembered and burned in the oven. Very gruesome, I know. He was finally caught when the sister of one of his victims tracked him down and convinced police that he was the one who killed her sister. And she was right. He was convicted in November of 1921 and sentenced to death by the guillotine. Moving on to number 7, we have Harold Shipman, aka Dr. Death. He was given this name because he was a doctor that killed at least 218 of his patients. So he was practicing in London from 1972 to 1998. During this time, he would kill innocent patients. In fact, he is said to be one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. Like, imagine going to a hospital thinking that they're going to save you, and instead, they kill you. He wasn't caught until people were like, wow, a lot of elderly women die when you're on duty. What's up with that? And then they noticed that his name was on a number of cremation certificates. So they got suspicious of him, and he was later caught and convicted in 2000. In our 6th spot today, we have Jane Topman. Here we have another medical professional who was also a serial killer. Jane Topman was a medical nurse fascinated with death. To others, she seemed like a dedicated, hardworking, and loving nurse. But in reality, she conducted a number of experiments on her patients. For example, she would give them a bunch of different drugs just to see what they would do to them. She also had the tendency to push her patients right to the edge of death and then bring them back to life and then kill them again. And then she developed this unhealthy obsession with autopsies. Jane was arrested in 1901 and admitted to taking the lives of 31 individuals, although the number could be much higher. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Vera Renzi. She was a Romanian serial killer given the name the Black Widow. This was due to the fact that she killed her 2 husbands as well as her multiple lovers. It's believed that she poisoned and killed at least 35 individuals, including her own son. And that's because her son was onto her and one day found coffins in the wine cellar and was like, I'm gonna call the police on you, mom. So she poisoned him to keep him from doing so. Later, the police grew suspicious of her because of the disappearance of one of her lovers. They investigated her home and found 32 unburied zinc-lined coffins, each containing a male corpse. She was then arrested and confessed to everything. In our 4th spot today, we have Emperor Caligula. Now, this dude was the 3rd emperor during the Roman Empire, and he literally was insane. Like, the stuff he did is just the definition of disturbing. Like, I don't think they can teach you about what he did in history class. It's that bad. So this guy was known to do messed up things to his prisoners. Like, he would grill them alive or chew on their no-go parts. He also just liked killing people for fun or watching people get tortured. In particular, he enjoyed watching innocent people get killed and eaten by wild animals. He was so crazy, people thought like he had some sort of ailment and that's what was causing him to do these things and be so messed up. In our third spot, we have VLAD the Impaler. Now, this dude was known as the real-life Dracula. In fact, the character Dracula was loosely based off of him. Like, in order for you to have a monster created off of you, you have to be a monster yourself. So this guy would do dark things like dip his bread in the blood of his enemies and then enjoy it. That's where the legend of Dracula sucking blood came from, because he would suck the blood out from his soggy bread. But he is most famously known for impaling his victims, hence why he's called VLAD the Impaler. This guy would impale people to death, just shove them on the stick so that it would come out their mouth, and then just leave them there. It's said that between 1448 to 1462, he killed about 20% of the population, which is a lot. Moving on to number 2, we have Shiro Ishii. Now, the things that this man got away with are disgusting. He's literally the definition of mad scientist. So in 1936, this dude built a huge compound to perform a number of disturbing experiments in. This place was called Unit 732. Some experiments included getting women pregnant by his fellow scientists and then cutting open these women to study them while pregnant. He was also known to amputate limbs and then reattach them to other parts of the victims' bodies, or he would freeze body parts so that he could study what would happen if you didn't treat gangrene. Trust me, it gets worse. Other prisoners were his test subjects for grenades and flamethrowers. Everything he did was horrific, and he was sadistic. He loved torturing people and running disturbing experiments on them. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Pol Pot. Pol Pot was the Prime Minister of Cambodia from 1976 to 1979. During his reign, he cleansed a fourth of his own nation. He wanted to destroy the civilization and turn it into a new age. So he ordered a genocide against his whole country. As a result, millions of Cambodians were displaced, tortured, and killed. Others were forced to work in a field fertilized by human bodies. And if you stopped working, you would either be punished by not being fed or by death. And if you made a mistake while working, you were also killed. Many people literally worked themselves to death. I could do a whole top 10 list on the dark things that this man has done. Like, it's that much, you know? He literally killed up to 3 million Cambodians. That's literally 25 to 33% of his country.